Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be doing another tier list video talking about all of the unique mechanics made in the Pokemon TCG. Now, I did actually create this tier list myself. Some of the cropping did ruin some of the images, so I'll explain those as I go. And you're welcome to go along as well. I'll have that in the description down below if you want to follow along. Just some things that I want to clarify though, because there are some smaller gimmicks here, but I decided to avoid like one-off gimmicks that are promo cards, things like the cool Porygon and the Electabuzz promo that puts a lightning rod marker, for instance. I ignored those. I also ignored cards that don't mechanically change the game. There are cards like the Rotom shiny forms, the shiny Pokemon from the Diamond and Pearl and Platinum eras. There's cards like the Alpha Lithographs that look very cool, and full art black and white cards. They don't change anything though, and that's also the case with rarities. So things like rainbow rares, things like character rares, they don't actually change the game. They aren't mechanically unique. So I kept it to mechanically unique things. There are a few like primes that technically are not mechanically unique. Primes and amazing rares, however, they are a gimmick and they are designed around a certain mechanic to make them that way. So yeah, we're going to be ranking every single one of these mechanics here. There are 48, I believe, in total, so it's going to be a bit of a longer one. Let me just fix the table real quick because I don't like the default colors of the tier list. So we're just going to go ahead and this actually is this color. Yep, there we go. We have orange, and then we will make the bottom tier F red. And I do think there's actually a fair amount of bad mechanics in the TCG. When I'm going to be talking about these, I am going to be talking about their mechanic and how they interact with cards, not specifically like how much I like them. Like the breaks I absolutely hate, for instance, but they're not like a bad mechanic. And the opposite is true of things like the like this crystal type Pokemon, which are gorgeous cards but horrible mechanically. And right up front we have crystal types. We're going to put them in F tier. For those who don't know, crystal types change their type, but they have these really awkward, just awful to pay attack costs. None of them were ever playable in any deck. I don't like play from the era, but I've never seen anyone make a single deck with these work. They're some of the worst cards possibly ever printed, even for a gimmick. They just don't interact with cards at all, so they're not very fun to play, I wouldn't imagine. Obviously, I'm a player that's come all the way back from 2011, and I've gone back and played retro for formats going back to 2009, and a little bit 2008 even. And I know a lot about the eras from like 2004, but like there is some like gaps there. So like some of the stuff I don't know as much about others. Moving on to the Shining Pokemon. Shining Pokemon are actually really cool in the Sun and Moon era in comparison to their older types, because Shining in the Sun and Moon era, while they didn't do anything particularly unique, Shining Celebi was very cool with its ability to make you remind your evolved Pokemon of their previous stage moves, and there was Shining Jirachi, which devolved Pokemon. So they don't do anything particularly unique. However, I do think that basically all of the Shining Pokemon were kind of cool in their own way. Whether they were used in decks or not, it really depends, but we're going to go ahead and put that in B tier. I do like them quite a bit. Next up we have the breaks. As I said, I hate break cards because they're awful to look at, just abysmal looking cards. But their interactions with the games are actually not bad. So I'm going to go ahead and give them I want to give them a C tier. Unlike Shining Pokemon, breaks were only basically, there was 8 breaks I'd say or so that actually saw play, but really only 2 or 3 that saw consistent play, and that's just because the format was not very kind to the breaks, and they weren't power leveled in a way that made them good. A lot of the breaks were actually really badly designed, where they gave them expensive attacks, or some of them were just used as HP buffs, which isn't really the spirit of the breaks. Which makes them a little bit worse. I think they probably could be B tier. It's like C+, B- kind of deal. Next up we have the Prism Stars. This is going to go in A tier. Prism Stars are one of my favorite mechanics of the recent era. Prism Stars are just so great. One of mechanics usually bother me, as you're going to see with the next few, like Radiant and Star, because they don't interact well with the cards, and they usually just land to 1 or 2 Pokemon that are used in like every other deck, right? But the way that Prism Stars work for one of, but you can use multiple types, was really cool. We saw really neat ideas explored. Some of them are more basic, like this Diancie Prism Star here, which just boosted your damage. But we saw some really cool Prism Stars, such as Ditto Prism Star, my absolute favorite one. We saw the supporters, which is pretty cool. The only thing I'd say that's holding Prism Stars down is the Stadium cards, which I think just kind of made the games a little bit unfair because they didn't give one to each type. And even then, like the discrepancy between one like Wonder Labyrinth and the Dark one and the Thunder Mountain from like the Grass one is pretty, like there's definitely a difference there in quality. So Prism Stars were really good though. They're really cool looking too. Not that this factors in here, but I really do like the look of the cards. There's a lot of neat ideas. There's a few that like I said I don't like Cyrus, but there's also so many I do like. Super Boost Energy, Diancie, Victini Prism Star, Ditto Prism Star, like so many really cool cards. Celebi Prism Star is also cool. That Prism Star definitely deserves it, and you know there's very good like punishment. The fact that they got a Lost Zone was a very cool thing in itself. Next up we have the Radiance. I'm going to rate Radiance a C. Radiance is obviously a very new mechanic. If you're around the TCG right now, you know what a Radiant is. 1 per deck. They're of shiny Pokemon. And I honestly, like, I'd have to say it's really downer that their artwork is pretty terrible. Pretty much across the board, none of them impress on the artwork department. They're all very cartoony and goofy. And, you know, which cartoony can be a good thing if it's done well, but I don't think any of them particularly look good. Though the Japanese holofoil on the cards is very cool, I will say. The English one is definitely nerfed, unfortunately. What comes down to Radiance, what I don't like is that when you have these one-of mechanics, they definitely center around a few. In this case, we have Greninja and we have Charizard, and essentially almost no other decks play. In other ones, we see some Gardevoir, some Serena. Occasionally, you'll see some other ones, right? But ultimately, these are like, and we'll see Eternatus when that comes out. You see like Charizard and you see Eternatus where decks can be based around it, and then you see like the consistency one that's going to be in every deck. And the same thing happened with A-Specs, and I just don't love the way that interacts with the cards. It's not really making it unique, it just makes an expensive one-of card in every deck. And Radiant Greninja in particular has definitely not been fun to play against recently. You know, I've been playing a lot of Ladder and Expanded, for instance, and I don't like seeing Radiant Greninja because it hits 2 bench Pokemon, which its attack is like shouldn't be able to be used easily, but because of Palkia being literally designed for the card, it very much is. Next up we have the Star Pokemon. My same opinion kind of with the Star Pokemon. I didn't play at the time, and I will say Star Pokemon are some of the most beautiful cards ever printed. In the looks department, they're really like an S tier. Just incredible looking cards, but the way they interact with the game is very similarly negative. It's basically price gated all of the EX era out of regular people. Like, you have to pay sometimes like $2,000 for a deck just because there's going to be like $1,000 and a gold star there and a bunch of like $100 EXs, right? And the gold stars in that way, the way they interact with the format is very similar to Radiance, where they're that one of, and there isn't consistency in the same way. They were usually attackers. Like Mew, Gold Star was used in like decks to hit spread, and we had like the Rayquaza and Latios and Latias used to like just hit pretty hard. They were definitely less usable than Radiance because they weren't as like powerful, and there wasn't just like a general like this is good in every deck kind of card like Greninja is. But they still, I just don't like the way that one-ofs interact in that kind of manner. I think it's more fun when you get to use multiple one-ofs in your deck, and when they really don't, like, you know, there's not like a distinct advantage to like one deck that can use this but the other deck can't, kind of deal. Obviously that's with every mechanic, but it's definitely like with the specific one-ofs it is ostracized a little bit more. Next up we have Team Plasma. I'm gonna rate this at B. Playing in the Team Plasma era, I am a little bit biased. I know some people would probably rank it lower because for some people the whole Colress machine spam is definitely a bit of a turnoff. The things like Hypnotoxic Laser, I know a lot of people really don't like. I'm kind of there with you because it is a very luck-based card and ultimately doesn't feel good to play against. But the Plasma engine in itself, outside of these like 1 or 2 toxic cards, is a pretty cool engine. The fact that you set up your whole board of Deoxys to boost your attackers, You go in with these attackers. The Plasma Energy itself is a blank card, but on almost every Plasma card it gives you these bonuses, which makes it really cool. There's, you know, weaker attackers like Tornadus, which do like energy, or it's a Thunderous, sorry, that do like energy recursion for setting up attackers. You have things like the Kyurem for the bigger hits, and Kyurem's a little bit like less cool because it doesn't do anything with Plasma Energy. You have things like Genesect, which, you know, with the Plasma Energy can gust. There's some really cool effects they built in there, so I do like it, although I will admit they are really, really ugly for all the regular Plasma cards. Man, they gave them all CG artwork. What were they thinking? Next up, we have the VMAX archetype, and that is going to go all the way down in F. VMAX are some of the worst cards ever created. It is unfortunately a side effect of the tag team cards coming out, but they had to make something that beats the tag teams, that's not just more tag teams. So they just made giant VMAXs, and even for a while they weren't even beating the tag teams. They were second place to them for about 5 sets into the Sword and Shield era. They were like not even beating tag teams because tag teams are just absurd. But they're not fun cards to play. The effects on them are usually like 1 attack and 1 ability, or 2 attacks where only one of them is good. There's almost no like separate route taking besides like Rapid Strike Urshifu is probably the only VMAX I can think of that has like a lot of game to it. Then Muke does copying, but any Pokemon with copying attacks is going to have game. They're very simple cards. They're very ugly too, because they're just someone diarrheaed a bunch of special effects all over the background and called it an artwork, and I just don't like them at all. The way they interact with the fact that they just like bully single prizers in the case of like Dragapult and Urshifu, the way they're just like giant and there's these numbers like inflated like 100 HP in the span of like 4 years into the VMAXs is just like awful. I don't like them at all. Next up we have the Vs. Vs are going to go down in D. They're not good. Like, that's the way I'm going to put it. Vs are bad. Like, when yeah, we'll put them in F. And I'll give some distinction later when we talk about EXs as well, but EXs are better than Vs. The big thing that hurts with Vs is the VMAXs. You get some Vs that are kind of interesting, you know, in the design, and usually they're all the basic Vs. And the reason they do this is because the VMAX ones, the ones that evolve into the VMAXs, are essentially like they don't exist. Like most of the ones that evolve into the VMAX, look at like Dragapult V, that card doesn't exist. Look at like, I mean, Shadow Rider's probably the only example that does. Ice Rider V, these cards just like, they're vanilla. They don't have anything going on. There is some Vs that do, but ultimately it's just a basic 2 prize mechanic, which is obviously already a flaw. I hate big basics and the effect they have on the game. And not only that, but half of them might as well just not exist in the first place. They are super overprinted. There's tons of Vs, and almost none of them are actually good, honestly. Like, none of the ones that didn't have VMAXs really saw that much play besides, like, Zacian and Zamazenta and Suicune. So, like, honestly, they don't feel like they should exist at all. Next up, we have V-Star. I'm going to put V-Star in the D tier. V-Star is better than Vs and VMAXs because I do think that being a 2-prizer evolution is at least somewhat more cool, and the effects do make them a little bit more unique, the V-Star power. However, you'll see there's going to be a big discrepancy between them and GXs, and the reason that I don't like V-Stars ultimately is because the V-Stars are built around the V-Star power. I know it's going to sound weird saying that I'm a channel that's based around Whimsicott, but Whimsicott V-Star is probably my favorite V-Star, purely just because the card isn't built around its V-Star power. If you look at all of the GXs from the GX era, none of them are based around their GX stacks. Half of them don't even use the GX stacks on a game basis because the GX stacks are just an extra option for those who are skilled enough to use it or play a deck to take advantage of it. Some are more common, you know, you see like Lycanroc GX would use its GX stack more often, but like a V-Star, Arceus V-Star, Lugia V-Star, Palkia V-Star especially, you're not going to go a single game without using those powers. Those cards don't exist without their V-Star powers. It's basically all the ability ones. They don't exist without their V-Star powers, and like that's bad card design because it's very linear. They only have 1 attack again, so they're not doing anything creative. They don't even get abilities in this case. They're just doing one thing, and then they have like one once per game, which is immediately always used. They never wait to use them. Once they can achieve the effect, they're going to do the effect. Like Palkia V-Star, once it has like 2 or 3 energy in the discard pile, there goes the V-Star power. Arceus, once you evolve into it, there goes the V-Star power. The way they're designed aren't creative. They focus on these V-Star powers, and they're not like very cool cards at all. The way they interact with the game is not great, but they are better than V's and VMAXs ultimately. This is a pretty low depth. Next up we have the GXs. GXs are our first S tier. GXs are one of my favorite mechanics of all time. Again, the GX tech is very brilliant. The fact that these cards aren't built around it is also good because it's just an option. GXs typically have 3 attributes on them, which is really great. There's a lot of things you can do with GXs that make them just awesome cards. And I just really love playing the GX eras. There's a lot of fun GX printings with cool abilities that make the game really fun to play. And it's also evolutions from basic Pokemon, which is obviously a very good thing. Next up we have the Dark Pokemon from the original 2000 Team Rocket set. I don't have any strong feelings about these ultimately. I don't know the exact way they interact with the meta other than that Dark Muck turned off all Poke Powers and Dark Vileplume turned off all trainer cards. Ultimately, I don't think most of them were good, so I think they're pretty poorly designed in that regard, that there's only like 1 or 2 that I can even think of. I'm probably missing some. And I don't feel that strongly, like if you were a huge fan of this era and you want to move them up to like A, B tier, like I wouldn't do anything different. I wouldn't put them ever in S. I can't think that's justifiable. But I just don't play this era, and particularly, you know, if you do and you really like these cards, that's something. I just don't think they're well designed by the fact that, like, I mean, this is just like no trainers for the rest of the game. That's kind of wild, honestly. So if it sits on the bench, you can't even like gust it up. That's kind of disgusting, huh? Disgusting palette, you would say. Next up, we have the Owner's Pokemon, again from Gen 1, kind of outside of my expertise. I think a lot more highly of these, though. Looking at, like, you know, Brock's and Misty's Pokemon, there's these support engines built into, like, each trainer. Like, Brock's has the one where you can make it so your energy can't be removed. What's it called, like, Brock's Care or something like that. There's, like, the, you know, unique gyms and unique trainer cards that, like, search for the Pokemon that have the guys in their name. And I just really, really like that. It's a really cool mechanic, honestly. Could have been a little bit better, like, designed competitively, probably. I think Rocket Zapdos is, like, the biggest thing about there, just because it's a basic that hits for 20. You know, that's just the era the game was in. But I do think there was a lot going there, so, yeah. Owner's Pokemon, pretty cool. Not my expertise, though. Flare Gear, this is talking about Headringer and Jamming Net, not Battle Compressor. Battle Compressor would probably put these lower. Honestly, these are also pretty good. I really like Headringer, and I thought it was a really cool card. I was outside of Standard for the time it was legal because I took a break from Flashfire's release till about right after the World Championships in 2016, where Steam Siege was the newest set. So this card had just rotated, in fact, but I was still playing the expanded format at this time, and this card was pretty cool. I like when you can interact with your opponent's board and they have to prepare counterplay or set up their board in a way that you can't do that in advance and then possibly be punished for that action if you take a counter action, which makes the cards really unique in that way. I do think it was very limited in its scope. Like, this is a potential to be like an S tier gimmick if they really explored the whole idea of attaching things to your opponent. Like, they could have energies, they could even have Pokemon that you attach to your opponent's Pokemon. And I think that would be a lot cooler. However, it's still pretty neat the way they went about doing Headringer. And Jamming Net was just never good. So I just think it's a really cool card. Potentially, if they explored a little bit too much, would we probably find some less than savory combos, definitely. But I do still like it. Next up, we have the Mega EX. I'm going to put those in D tier. I don't feel too strongly about the Mega EX Pokemon. Again, I was outside the game for most of the time they were legal. However, I did still play things like Mega Gardevoir EX from Steam Siege, and I played, in fact, the other Mega Gardevoir EX from Primal Clash. I played Primal Groudon a little bit after the fact, and those cards were very cool to play. I do think that they have the unique Spirit Link mechanic, which is a cool balancing effect. And unlike the V-Stars, I'd rank them above V-Stars. They're almost like a C tier. Maybe even I'll move them up at the end if I feel strongly enough. It's like very top of D kind of deal. That sounded awful. Because they do have a limitation, but their Vs are actually designed cool too. Like if you look at Manectric EX, that's like a good card. You know, Mewtwo EX was so good that people played a stadium just to remember the Mewtwo EX's attacks. We had, you know, trying to think other megas, like Groudon had a really, really good Rip Claw attack that was like actually worth spamming. So people did play like Shrine of Memories in some of their decks to remember that. And, you know, they actually like put text on those cards. And the megas, again, only had one attack, which does suck. However, they were still pretty cool. They gave them like tips that and you know, things to actually like use their effects a little bit more, which is also pretty cool. Next up, we have the Pokemon SP from the Diamond and Pearl era. Not owners Pokemon, they are called Pokemon SP as a whole, and I'm going to rank them at S tier as well. For anyone who knows, I'm a huge fan of the 2010 format, and SP are a big part of that. I'm not even usually the one playing the SP deck. Usually I'm playing against it. But SP is just a really fantastically designed mechanic. You could say, oh, but you complained about big basics. Here's the thing with basics in this era. This is an 80 HP Garchomp basic that is half the size of when I evolve my Stage 2 Torterra. This Zacian V is bigger than any Stage 2 in the entire Sword and Shield era as a 220 HP basic. So, like, these big basics had less HP than the regular Pokemon, and their attacks were actually super, like, not cost effective. And that was by design, because they had the energy gain to reduce the attack cost. And they also have things like Power Spray to slow down the opponent. It seems broken, however, there is clauses on the card that make it difficult to use. There's built-in counters in the format, things like Spiritomb that limit the card. And there's also, you know, the fact that they healed themselves with Garchomp C-Level X, the fact that they have Gusting with Luxray, and Scoop Up. Like, this seems broken, but again, the low HP makes it so that ultimately it's very balanced in a way, and there's always counterplay. Every single action that SP has lots of counterplay. The best counter decks to SP are like big tanking Stage 2s, honestly, and, you know, power locking, item locking with things like Spiritomb, right? There's just so much counterplay, but so many cool things that SP can do. It's basically just a variable toolbox of attackers. Yeah, SP is just fantastic. Probably the best mechanic, I'd say, on this entire list, even. Maybe below GX, maybe below one other that we'll get to, but it's definitely top 3. Next up, we have the EXs from the Ruby Sapphire era, 2003 to 2007. Ruby Sapphire base, 2 Power Keepers. Initially, these were pretty lame designed. If you look at the ones in Power Keepers, or not Power Keepers, in Ruby Sapphire, they're actually pretty terrible. But once they got to Sandstorm, they started to hit their groove, and from there, it was just to the races. They're not perfect ultimately, but I do think they're still very cool. They are just a 2 prize of the Evolve from things that don't have anything going for them like GXs do. But I'm still going to put them in B tier. Again, I'm not an expert of this era. However, they are still a well-designed mechanic. They had plenty of counterplay, things like Desert Ruins around. Again, with GXs, that was another thing. Things like Shrine of Punishment around. In this era, they had Desert Ruins. They had lots of power locking for the powerful EX powers. They had things that hit EXs for more damage. There's just a lot of checks and balances that made these cards powerful but not broken, that made the era really beloved by its players. Next up, we have the big EXs from the Black and White and X and Y era, not including Mega EX, and we're going to put those in D tier as well. However, they are, you know, you look at Vs and you look at EXs and you're like, why are EXs above Vs? They're functionally identical, and ultimately that is true. However, EXs, because of Mega EXs and because of the fact that the EXs were designed better as cards and aren't just blank templates to evolve, I ultimately think they are better than the Vs. They also, because of the era, it isn't because of the V specifically, but because of the EX era, you actually get some long drawn-out games in Black and White. You know, like 2014 is a very fun format to play, for instance, the very early XY, late Black and White format. You actually get some drawn-out fun games, whereas you don't really get that in the Sword and Shield V era. Next up, we've got the Arceus, kind of a sub kind of mechanic, but it's just that these Arceus are mechanically unique because you can play as many as you like in your deck. I think Pokemon think they had a hit when they did this. They like printed, you know, the beginning door to just search any Arceus, and they printed like just all these cards to make this Arceus engine work. And ultimately, it really just didn't. It kind of fell apart entirely. It was never a deck worth taking seriously because SP was ultimately just the better big basic strategy because it had so many more options than Arceus, and it wasn't just a weakness box, which Arceus almost just ends up being, is just a weakness box. So the Arceus are pretty cool. They just didn't have the same options as SP. They didn't have power locking. They didn't have poison in special conditions. They did not have the healing. But they're still kind of neat. I'd say they'd probably go C tier though. They don't do anything particularly special. Next up we have Team Magma and Aqua from 2015. And if you're like, wait, these cards existed? Yes, they did in the set XY Double Crisis. This mechanic almost saw no play. The only card from this set that saw any major competitive use was actually just a Team Magma Stadium, Team Magma Secret Base, which was used in the Gyarados Ancient Origins deck to damage its Magikarps. Ultimately, the strategy itself, though, kind of falls apart just because the numbers are too low. We're in a bigger EX era, and this era was dominated by Night March and item-locking Seismitoads, as well as these giant Mega EXs. And these Magma Pokemon, which were mimically designed, if you look at the cards, a lot of them are very similar in design to the 2004 Team Magma Aqua cards, like the Zangoose look at, for instance, like same attacks on that, just, you know, upscaled in power. But unfortunately, they're just not upscaled in power enough. There wasn't enough checks and balances for the EXs and Mega EXs, as well as just Night March being the best single prize strategy to make it worth playing. But I did think these cards are very cool, and I think not as cool as the original EX mechanic, Magma Aqua mechanic, but like it is still a very cool engine. I do think there's a lot of cool cards in it, just kind of flopped as a mechanic. But honestly, it's a set I really want to complete someday. It's a really cool set. Next up, we have the Delta Species cards. These are going in A tier. Delta Species are super, super cool. Obviously, they are the dual type Pokemon, usually double typed with metal, and they have a whole bunch of cards that draw cards for Delta, like Licky Tongue Delta. We have cards that search Delta, like the Flygon. We have Energy Acceleration for Delta. There's a whole different like pool of cards that they use, including the Holon's cards, which are often used with them. I do still think that they're very cool in design. I haven't played with them personally, so I can't speak on how good they are, but there were, you know, lots and lots of decks at the time that played Delta Pokemon, so I assume they were pretty good. Just from like my, you know, looking into the mechanics and its operations, I would give it already an A, though it's a great looking mechanic. Next up we have the Primes. Pokemon Prime, like I'm almost tempted to give them an A, but they don't actually do anything unique. They're just really cool cards in the way that they work, because they're just evolutions, and they promoted a lot of evolution in the Heart Gold to Silver era. Heart Gold to Silver era was the start of kind of the downfall of the TCG design-wise for a while, because they really designed the game to be simpler. If you look at the Heart Gold to Silver cards compared to like cards from Diamond and Pearl Stormfront, it's like worlds apart. The SP engine, for instance, is way more complex than anything from Heart Gold to Silver, but you do still get a lot of cool Prime cards like the Kingdra Prime, which fit perfectly into like the 2010 format. Cards like the Magnezone Prime, which are very cool in 2011. They're still very focused on evolutions, and it made a really fun game to play. Next up we have the Fusion, Rapid, and Single Strike. Very conveniently put together. We'll talk about them all at once. The Fusion Strike, obviously focusing around Mew. I tried to use Pokemon, though, that didn't encompass multiple elements when doing these pictures. So like I didn't try to put a VMAX from this, because it would be a VMAX and a Fusion Strike, so I tried to put cards that are just vanilla plus, you know, X mechanic. So the Meloetta is in the Fusion Strike engine in itself. A lot of people really hate it. Like I know my friend has it as like his least favorite mechanic, because he just hates seeing Fusion Strike cards. He hates Genesect V, just being able to draw cards. I ultimately think it would be fine if there was more checks and balances. I do think they went a little bit too hard, though, on the Mew VMAX line. They gave it way too many tools, things like Mew being able to shuffle itself in the deck. Probably not necessary. Genesect is like 4 times a turn. Maybe that could just be like 2 times a turn, right? You know, they haven't put that wording into like any cards, unfortunately. Like, you can only play 2 of X per turn. They've never done that, but I do think that would be better designed than how it currently is. So I'll put it in C tier. It's not like a bad mechanic. There are some cool cards in the Fusion Strike engine, but I don't love it as a whole. I could see myself putting it down to D tier. It's definitely like low C. You know, maybe I will. We'll put it down to D tier. Yeah. Next up, we have the Single Strike. Single Strike, the engine just feels rough. And that's a funny one because there's a dog. You get it? Rough. Besides the funny puns, Single Strike engine is boring. The entire engine is just around do big damage, and every single Strike Pokemon, Gengar, you know, Urshifu, the only one that had any kind of like uniqueness to it was Umbreon, right? The rest of them are just do big damage, and you know, you have Duraludon, which just does big damage while not taking damage, and it's just not very unique in the way the cards operate at all. Again, gonna be D tier. I think over time, maybe like Fusion Strike is better than Single Strike, so maybe it'll go like C tier, but like I'm fine keeping it here. I think I put Mega EX before Fusion Strike to C. Next we have the Rapid Strike mechanic. Rapid Strike I'm going to put in B. Rapid Strike cards were a lot more interesting than Fusion Strike and Single Strike. There's a lot of cool attacks. I liked it in engines based on searching cards. If you don't know, I'm a huge fan of searching. Drawing is boring. Searching cards is very skill-based. You get punished for things you don't do, and every decision is important, which is why searching is like the best kind of mechanics in the game. So I love when supporters don't discard draw 7. I love when supporters search your deck for cards. Hint, hint, Pokemon, you should bring those cards back. Roseanne, and stop printing Juniper. Please stop printing Juniper. Please stop printing discard draw 7. Please stop printing discard draw 7. Please stop printing it. Yeah, back to Rapid Strike. A lot of cool attacks. You know, I don't like Urshifu just because it gatekeeps evolutions. However, the card is very unique, has a lot of thought-provoking to it. You get some like less cool Rapid Strike cards, like why is Rayquaza VMAX even a Rapid Strike card? That card does not interact with anything Rapid Strike. It's just Rapid Strike for the sake of it. You get the fact that it's like decreased retreat cost, so they're very movable. Almost feels like SP in that way, where it's like a movable toolbox. However, they did just very much focus on the big guys, of course, because it is the modern era, and they're not really designing toolboxes in the same way they used to. Next up, we have the V-Union mechanic, which I'm going to give a C tier. I think the V-Union mechanic is a flop as a mechanic because none of the cards besides Mewtwo were good. But I do think the mechanic is a very cool design. The fact that you get to get all of them in the discard pile, the fact that they play as one Pokemon, the fact that they're not basic so you can't even search them out easily, and there's no Bio Compressor in this format. In the standard format, at least expanded, I don't like these cards at all. It's just very cool. I think the fact that they have like 8 attacks is interesting, though. The way they printed the attacks, most of them are kind of either like broken or terrible, and there's like no in between. I just think it's a cool mechanic overall. I think they did an okay job with it, but it just totally flopped in the game. You basically only just get Mewtwo V-Union. Because they're just not good in this era of doing 200 damage turn 1, so, or turn 2, sorry. Turn 1 was Tag Team era, 200 damage. Next up, we have the Amazing Rares. This is kind of another flop as a mechanic. They only saw play recently with the release of the Lost Engine and with the release of the Lugia V-Star and its Archeops. But the cards are just designed with horrible attack cost. Again, like looking back at Crystal Pokemon, they're almost as bad with these amazing Pokemon. And besides that, they're not mechanically unique. They just have awful attack costs and really strange attacks. So I'm gonna go D tier. They look cool, but like they just don't cut it as a mechanic at all. Holons. Holons, there's only a couple Holon cards. There is the Holon, engine, if you consider that, with the Holon Transceiver, but I don't consider that personally because it's not a mechanically unique thing. It's just a search card. So I'm talking specifically about the Holon's Pokemon. Holon's Cast Form, Holon's Electrode, Voltorb, Magnemite, Magneton, which stats themselves as energies. That's pretty cool. The way it was designed is very cool. However, the way it was designed is also broken in a way, and I wouldn't want to see it nowadays because attaching a double rainbow energy and having to return energy seems like kind of balanced until you get to like multiple energy attachments per turn, and then the cards just like power up absurd attacks like LBS's attacks in like a single turn. And I just don't think there's the checks and balances it needs. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. However, like if you include the like supporter engine, it's probably like easily B. So yeah, that's my reasoning. Next up, we have the light Pokemon from the Neo Destiny set. Light Pokemon are actually really unique, I think, mechanically. All of their attacks either boost their teammates, hit like dark Pokemon harder, or they have like limitations where if their opponent's like certain thing, they can't do the full effect of their attack, which is like a really cool mechanic. I don't think they were ever like used competitively more than like once or twice, but the mechanic design is very cool, so I'll put it in B tier. Dark Pokemon, very similar to the original, like, although I do think that they get some cool powers, I guess. We'll move this up to C. They do get some cool powers in this era, like Dark Feraligatr turns off the baby abilities, and Dark Gengar, like, attacks, I forget, does it, like, pull Pokemon up from the discard pile or something, or is that Haunter? I forget. The Dark Pokemon from this era are pretty cool. They're not my expertise, but I do think they improve a little bit on the old Dark Pokemon by giving them some cool Poke powers. So, yeah, this is Dark Pokemon from Neo Destiny. Next up, we have the Ultra Beast mechanic. I'm going to put that in B tier. Ultra Beasts were pretty neat, but there was some slight downfalls. I do like the Ultra Beast things. Like the Beast Box, you know, things like Ultra Space and, you know, Stack Attack, like these boosts that kind of apply in like a Team Plasma kind of way, where I think the Ultra Beast kind of downfalls the mechanic. Also, all the Ultra Beasts are like super cool. Not every single one, but like I love Blacephalon, love Kartana, love Pheromosa, just Guzzlord's awesome, like very cool cards. Buzzwole's cool too. Buzzwole really grew on me. The downfall of these cards, I will say, is that I don't like Beast Ring. Beast Ring feels like a very like gambling card, especially in the Sumlot format, where Blacephalon is a deck. I love Sumlot, but Blacephalon is like almost like rolling the dice. If you just like land 3 Beast Rings on a turn and you just have them all, it's just like, okay, I can't lose now. Like literally, doesn't matter what you do, I've won the game kind of deal, and that doesn't feel great. So it's a little bit high rolly there, but in the same regard, it is still a cool mechanic. Next, we have the baby Pokemon from the Neo era. I didn't include the Harkle Silver baby Pokemon. Because they're definitely not mechanically unique, as well as the ones from the late Sun and Moon era. While they are like a subset of cards that act similarly, they're not doing anything different mechanically. There's no rule box, there's no stamp, there's no like effect on the game like the baby Pokemon had. There's no like searchability, anything. These baby Pokemon did have things, like I said, Feraligatr turned off baby powers. There's a baby rule, there's a rule box. However, I don't like their effect on the game, and that's because ultimately it's just a very flippy era. These baby Pokemon, unlike Harkle Silver, force you to flip to even attack. Even if you were like using an attack to like heal yourself, you still had to flip. Whereas in the Harkle Silver era, they just protected themselves from damage, which was more balanced. As well as that is also came in the same era. Very much flaw of the era is the interaction with the baby Pokemon and Focus Band, which can essentially make it so you have to get a 25% chance coin flip to even just KO a single baby. And if you fail that, you're like back to square one. So yeah, I don't love them. But set of Pokemon are cool. Just these are kind of badly designed. Next we have the Tag Team Pokemon. In fact, I labeled this as Tag Team GX, but I'm actually just gonna like just errata this on the spot to be Tag Team cards in general, including the supporter engine. Originally, I would have just ranked these F if these were Tag Team Pokemon. Tag Team Pokemon are atrocious for the game. One of the worst decisions ever made. We went from one of the best formats ever in Sunlot to like one of the worst eras of the entire game. The entire time tag teams were legal, they're not good. Ever since they've been expanded, the format's been so much worse. Tag teams are the worst designed card of all time, possibly. They have just such game-breaking effects on big basic Pokemon. There's that big basic again. Except for they're not just big basic, they are massive basic. Bigger than like anything we've ever had at that point. Like bigger than the stage 2s as a basic. That was when that started. And they're just the worst design ever. But I'm going to move them up to D. because I'm going to have this include the tag team cards, including the supporter engine and tag call. And while I do think tag call in Guzmahala is a problematic card in Expanded right now because of its interactions with old cards like double color or double dragon energy, my bad. Ultimately, the tag team supporters are actually a really cool engine, similar to the Holon cards, in the way that they just interact with each other. They tag call for like double tag supporters. There's decks that just play tag supporters without playing the actual tag teams in them, and I just really like the tag team supporters. Things like Malalana, Cynthia Caitlyn, were really cool cards, and I like them a lot. And unfortunately, just it's held back really hard by the Pokemon. Because the Pokemon are, like I said, they're really cool looking, but they're the worst cards ever printed. Like, VMAX and Tag Team are the two worst ones. Tag Team Pokemon. Next up we have the Rockets Pokemon. There was like 8 Rockets EXs and then like 2 Rockets Secret Rares. So only like a few Rockets Pokemon. But there is a distinction between Dark and Rockets in this era. I'd say that Rockets is probably like a C tier. I'm not, again, an expert on this era, but they didn't really like, only one of them I really know like seeing a lot of play. The rest of them kind of just were a little bit too awkward, and they're cool cards in theory, but I just don't like love them, and I'm not an expert on this era, so maybe I'm just a little bit unbiased. I do know Sneasel's like the only good one though. Dark Pokemon on the other hand, very good. Yeah, I'm gonna give it, it's like B plus A, right? Like, I think I like them better than everything in like B besides like Prime, but I think we're gonna give them A. The Dark Pokemon themselves function really cool, especially this Electrode. I chose Electrode because the Dragtrode combo is very cool, and the Dark Pokemon just, they're in general just like regular Pokemon, but they worked with Darkness energy and the Rockets energy or R energy or whatever it was. Maybe they didn't work with R energy. It's like dark metal. There's like a few others, right? But it's just a cool mechanic, the way they interact with each other, these interacting evolutions, similar to Aqua Magma. Next up we have the Dual type from Steam Siege. They were only in one set, fortunately. I don't hate them. They're pretty cool. They don't really interact a lot, but I do think from like the little bit that they existed, they were just a really good time in the format. I really like Galvantula, that's why I used an image of it, because of the way it interacted with Shaman EX, being able to hit that for weakness. The Bisharp being able to hit 2 weaknesses with its Retaliate was very cool. The way they interacted with the Rainbow Road Xerneas was cool. The way that Volcanion interacted with water support, even though it's mainly seen as a fire type Pokemon. These dual types just gave them access to things they otherwise wouldn't have and made them cool cards, and it was just a really good time for them to exist. Next up we have Held Item Pokemon. These existed in the Diamond and Pearl era, and the Held Item Pokemon just had a little like rule box right here that says that they have an item, and it gave them an effect. The best ones were like Duskull and Clefairy, which just allowed them to evolve. Clefairy didn't evolve into anything great though, so that card was actually not good. But there were some other ones that were pretty cool that just like gave it healing effects. There was one that just boosted its damage of its attacks under conditions. There's just all sorts of like cool little boxes here. It's almost like an ability, so this just gives more to basic Pokemon. And there's Pokemon with like already 2 attributes that had these, and it just gave them a lot, and it made this Duskull really, really good. So that's why I picked Duskull. Next up we have the Restored Pokemon. I'm going to put this in F tier. This is talking about the X and Y and Black and White era. They were called Restored because the way that you got them into play was by playing a fossil trainer card that interacted with the bottom 7 cards of your deck, and if it found a Pokemon that matched its description, it would put it in play. And they're just bad. They made fossils almost unplayable for a long time. Obviously, Archeops was banned and expanded because of Maxis, because you could just get into play instantly. But fossils just became too hard to play. Even when they made the ruling in Plasma Blast, where the fossils put themselves to the bottom of the deck, so you can get them with the tool or with the item card, they're just still really awkward to play. Not fun to use, and it just made cards really bad. Like, Evolutions were already struggling, and Restored Pokemon had it even worse. Next up, we have a little-known group of 3 cards. I had to group them together. because it kind of feels weird to like put them separate from each other when it's like literally 3 cards that do this. We have Imprison, Shockwave markers. Imprison was on the Gardevoir EX Delta Species card, and Shockwave was on the Tyranitar EX Delta Species card. Shockwave, when you put it on one of your opponent's Pokemon and then you used Tyranitar's other attack, it would just instantly KO that Pokemon. So it was just a 2-hit KO guaranteed if they couldn't remove it. They removed it by playing this Tropius right here, which just removed all Shockwave and Imprison markers. The Gardevoir had the Imprison markers, where it would lock your opponent's Pokepowers and Pokebodies, which is very cool. Like, just once during your turn, you get to put a marker on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And that's definitely the strong one, the one I like more. You just get to put a marker on one of your opponent's Pokemon that can't use their Pokepowers and Pokebody. There's only one Pokemon, so, like, you gotta choose wisely. And, of course, there's counterplay with Tropius, though I don't know how many people actually did that. It's very cool, though. I think I'm gonna give it B tier, like, potential to be A, but Shockwave is very much not that cool. We have Fossil from the original era. I don't have any strong opinions about the original fossils. It's just evolved from a trainer card, right? But it is mechanically unique because evolving from a trainer card is something different. With the fossils from the 2003 to 2009, I possibly should have divided this in 2 because the way that these fossils existed in their own eras is very different. Fossils in the 2003, 2004, 5, and 6, and even 7, well, before Diamond and Pearl, right, they didn't give up a prize card, so they were actually used. Not only were fossil decks like pretty good in 2004, like Cradily and Armaldo are like decent decks, but fossils also had like RSPK decks, and part of that's because they don't give up prize while you're setting them up, which is really good. And then fossils also played a role in hit and run decks because they didn't give up a prize. You would just throw a fossil active, and you could have like 12 fossils in your deck just throw up active, which made decks like Politoed and Wailord EX possible, because you can just continually go into these fossils. And they, the reason I categorize them together is because this is the era of fossils where fossils had Pokebodies on them, which made it made them very unique in a way, because they had like these cool different reactions to cards that would get played, which makes them more unique than like Mysterious Fossil. And in the Diamond and Pearl era, though, fossils definitely saw a huge downplay. For the first part, they gave up prize. For the second part, there wasn't many good Pokemon to evolve from the fossils. We did get like a decent Aerodactyl and a good Rampardos, but the problem is, especially that came out for these Pokemon, is that the Stage 2 Pokemon were so strong in the Diamond and Pearl era, and when the Spiritomb came out, Spiritomb just entirely invalidated fossils. Item lock was pretty common in this era. Like, there was lots of different like Deafen attack, and there was, Spiritomb, and Spiritomb was just everywhere in 2010, and that just made fossils like unplayable. So fossils kind of disappeared for that year, and fossils honestly just weren't a thing in general during like almost all of Diamond and Pearl. So I'm gonna kind of balance it out at C tier. Like, the EX era fossils would probably be B tier, but like the Diamond and Pearl ones definitely held them back. They had the same effects technically, but because they have a prize and because item lock was more prevalent in the game, they just couldn't see play in the same way. Skyridge Fossil is essentially the same thing as Mysterious Fossil, but it puts them like into play, something like that. It's a different card. You can see it's a colorless Pokemon actually on the card instead of being a trainer, which is kind of unique. So it can actually be like trainer locked, which is, I guess, better, right? Next up, we have Level X Pokemon. Level X Pokemon go into the S tier. Easily top 2 to 3 mechanics. I don't know if I can call it number 1. SP and Level X kind of compete for that. GX is probably number 3, but Level X's are so good. I'd say probably Level X. I'm gonna say Level X is number 1 because I just love the Level X mechanic as a whole. Yeah, let's rank it like that. Level X's are so good. Because similar to breaks, they just level up from the Pokemon, but obviously they went into a better format. So like every level X was like good, right? Not like every level X, but almost every level X was good. And the way they interacted together was really cool. They made it so you're in a turn, you could do multiple Pokepowers, multiple Pokebodies, and you could use from like 4 to 5 different attacks, right? Or I guess 3 to 4 attacks, and then you'd get like, even Flygon had Memory Berry, and then it'd have like 8 attacks, right? And 2 Pokebodies. And that's like absolutely insane. The era just has so much thought going into the games. Every game is like thought-provoking. It's besides like donks, right? The games are super thought-provoking, drawn out, and the level X's are a huge part of like what makes the game so skill-based in this era, because you have so many options, but there's like 5 right answers, but there's only one absolutely right answer that's going to lead you to win the game, and you've got to pick. Like, you gotta pick the best option, not just the right option. You gotta pick the best option every single turn to be, like, the best player in this era. And it's super fun, giving Pokemon lots of options, giving Pokemon lots of powers and bodies, just made the gameplay, like, there's so many more variables going on. In fact, it's, again, like, evolution Pokemon for the most part. Obviously, we had SPs, which are technically basics. Even then, they turn to, like, pseudo-evolution Pokemon. With that, and like there's like stage 3s, and they're everywhere because evolution was good and evolution was supported. Supporters were good at the time. The setup Pokemon like Spiritomb, Sableye were good at the time. Like, everything was so good in the Diamond Pearl era, and the Lexes are a huge part of that. Next up, we have Team Aqua Magma. I'm gonna start hurrying up. My voice is running out. Team Aqua Magma is pretty cool. The way they interact with each other is very unique. I do think that I'm gonna put it in C tier because it's got some highs, it's got some lows. The highs of this like engine is that the fact that you can put like stage 2s into play with Maxie or Archie is really cool. The way that the stage 2s actually like work, the way that you can like use fossils in this format to just like mulligan until you get like, there was decks where you just only played a stage 2 Aqua Pokemon, I think it was Walrein, and you just mulligan fossils until you got that Walrein into play, right? With the Archie. The Magma engine was pretty cool. Obviously, you had like the Magmas, there was Camerupt and Claydol, which were like the support Pokemon, and they just powered up this big basic Groudon, and then you also had Zangoose to hit like Rayquaza EX for weakness, because colorless was a weakness back then. And it is cool. I will say its downside though is that it's very linear. Like the Magma engine, there was no good stage 2s in Magma, so like you just played that Magma. There's only one Magma deck. There's only one way to build Magma, and it's kind of linear in that way. Aqua has a little bit more going for it in that regard, because there was just like an Aqua's Kyogre deck, and there was the Aqua Walrein deck. But they're not like, it's like a similar like engine going. So it's like almost B tier, but I'm just gonna give it C tier because it is a little linear. Next up, we have Ace spec cards, similar to Radiant Stars. We'll just put it in between. It's just a one of. Ace specs are probably the worst offender of the one of is bad rule. Every deck had to play an Ace spec. It wasn't like Stars where it's an option, and there is even some decks that don't play Radiance. Every deck had to play an Ace spec because they were that good. And Computer Search was just objectively the best one because it's the most consistent. But you also had Dowsing Machine, which is second best one. And you had like Scoop Cyclone and Scramble Switch for like tied for third, and you had Life Dew for fourth. And then every single other one was just like you can only use it for X deck or they were unplayable. So like there was just these objective best consistency ones again, which I don't love. And then you had like the I'm using G Booster because I'm Genesect EX kind of thing. It just made the cards less fun to use. I do love Genesect TX and G Booster, but Ace spec mechanic as a whole is just bad. It's just a bad one-off mechanic. And then we have Ancient Traits. Ancient Traits are kind of cool, but most of them weren't actually that good. They had like these little rule box cards which gave them essentially like another ability, but it couldn't be turned off. And there's kind of just like no interactability at all with the Ancient Traits. Like there was no cards like benefited from like hitting Ancient Traits. You didn't have like benefits from having Ancient Traits on your field. They just kind of existed, and they just kind of had a rule box there that like gave them an extra ability. And some of them were good, like Articuno was good. There was like Bunnelby, which is good because it can attack twice, but ultimately I think they're pretty poorly designed in the fact they don't do anything. But the artwork is cool, but like this isn't artwork based, because this is artwork based Gold Stars like S tier, and then like Level X is like D tier because the Level X artworks aren't great. I'm talking about like in like its mechanics. Legend cards are pretty cool. They're gonna put them in B tier. Again, artwork. If they were artwork, Legends would be S, but they're not. The Legend mechanics, it is hard to get these Legends into play. I picked Dark Arc Excelia just because it's my favorite one, but In actuality, the most playable one was like Entei Raikou, Entei Suicune and the Truth. We saw Rayquaza Deoxys. They weren't that playable, almost like V-Unions in a way, but they were more playable because the format was hospitable. They were the only 2 prizes around for a while, which made them unique in that way. And they were very high risk, high reward, but they actually made it like worth it on multiple occasions. And also just served as like a tank, which is kind of cool, kind of like the Mewtwo V-Union tank, but there's not as much healing going on. So I kind of like them. Maybe I'm a little biased. They could go in like C tier, but I just love Legends, honestly. But playing them is not always fun. And next we have the Shining Pokemon, which are going to go in F tier. That's the final one. It seems harsh, but Shining Pokemon, like, again, they have these awful attack costs. This is water, fire, fighting for like 30 damage. That's awful. Just these, they were all basics, which is like already kind of like I don't love big basics, right? But they also like just had these weird attack costs that made them like unplayable, and they're just like collector cards. They look awesome, but mechanically they don't do anything. You don't get any benefit from them being in play. You don't get any benefit from like hitting them. There's no interactability, there's no play, there's no counterplay. In fact, I saw no play at all. So yeah, that is my gimmick tier list. Again, if you want to do it mechanic, not gimmick. They are gimmicks though. If you want to do this yourself, it'll be in the description. This is how I rank these. Obviously, everyone's going to have different opinions. Some people might be like, bruh, I love Mewtwo EX versus Mewtwo EX. That was my favorite 3-turn games, bro. Put the Mewtwo EX back up top. Some people might be like, bruh, I love ADP. The 3-turn games of Arceus Dialga boss game, bro. That's like peak Pokemon. I don't even have to read my opponent's board. I don't have to like even read my own cards. I know like 5 cards in this deck. Put this S tier, right, is what they'd be saying. But, you know, this is my opinion. This is obviously what I think. I'm, again, very biased towards, like, Sumlot and the eras right here. And again, like, I also love 2011 eras like HSS and BI, which only have, like, Primes and Legends, because, like, Black and White early doesn't have any mechanics going on. They just have full arts, right? So, like, I'm a fan of my mechanics of these awesome eras I played. I'm a long-time player. So I've gotten to experience most of these, and that's what I think of them. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.